What's up everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great and following the 3 H's of the channel. In this video, it's all about those things that happen in the backwoods, or the deep woods, or just in the forest. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, pull up a stump with me, and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. So I've got a pretty crazy story, that's the only way to put it. My cousin lives in Montana with his ailing mom. He has a nice plot of land on the Bitterroot River. I flew out one summer to visit. It was my first time at his place. I was 24 at the time. He was 27. This was around 10 years ago. The first few days, we all do the normal outdoor stuff. Fishing, hiking, canoeing on the river, etc. My cousin also owns a couple of horses, so for the weekend, we planned a bit of a horsey camping trip. We basically just plotted out a big circle that would start on his land and eventually come back. We leave Friday morning. We have minimal rations in our packs. We have enough for an emergency, but we also want to have to hunt and trap our own food. It started off really nice. It was a beautiful morning. The first day was pretty uneventful. Not really anything worth talking about. We made camp, bagged some rabbits for dinner. We followed an official trail right up until the last half hour or so of the first day. And then we cut through the woods and would continue basically cross country for the rest of the trip. So we made camp that first night, not too far from the trail yet. We skin and clean the rabbits that we caught, and we get them roasting on a spit over the fire. We're just chilling around the fire, swapping stories and telling each other scary things and whatnot. It begins to get dark. We finish eating and go to bed for an early start. I hear, not too far off, what sounded like a mountain lion scream. The horses started freaking out, so we went to go calm them down. It took a while, but we didn't hear anything else, so we went back to sleep. We started out late that morning, and remembering the mountain lion, we had our rifles within reach. Being off the trail, I was surprised at the lack of wildlife. We heard plenty of birds and stuff, but my cousin said we should have spotted shitloads of animals by now, deer, foxes, and things like that. But we just shrugged it off. Later that day is when it started getting weird. There were several moments when we traveled in complete silence. No bird sounds, nothing. The second time it happened, even the horses seemed affected by it. They were laying their ears back down, jerking the reins nervously. I suggested to my cousin that we stop for the day, and he agreed. He sounded relieved when I'd asked. That night was very uncomfortable. There was a sort of pall hanging over our previous good spirits. We didn't talk that much, and when we went to bed, I had my rifle within arm's reach. I can't really explain why we felt like this. Anyway, after a few hours of basically just tossing and turning, we hear it. Another scream. It was hard to tell in the dark, but it definitely sounded closer than last night. Me and my cousin fly out of our tents, staring at each other. The scream happens again. It sounded even closer that time, and my cousin looked at me right in the eye and said there's no way that that's a cougar. The horses were going batshit, kicking the air and trying to escape their tethers. We couldn't even approach them safely. And then we hear it again. It sounded like it was right on top of us. But then we heard a different sound. It was just a repeated thudding, kind of like what a horse sounds like when it gallops, but a lot slower. Along with the thuds are sounds of bush cracking and gravel skittering down the slope behind our camp. The screaming increased in volume and started coming every 10 seconds or so. It was blood-curdling, almost a shriek at some points, but at the same time, guttural and hoarse. I was absolutely frozen in shock. I had no idea what to do. My cousin started shouting, not really saying anything, just shouting at the top of his lungs. He fired off a few shots and stopped yelling, and then things got really quiet. Then we heard more of the thudding and the gravel falling, and after standing there in dead silence for what seemed like forever, we sat around the fire until dawn. No way we were sleeping now. As soon as the sun came up, we set out. At this point, we were roughly 60 miles from the nearest trail. There were no animals that I could see, no birds singing, no anything. We kept hearing branches cracking and leaves rustling, sometimes behind us, sometimes off to the side. At one point, I saw something move behind a tree. I just fired blindly at it. I was terrified. The terrain was rough, and we had our horses going as fast as possible. Early that evening, dusk was coming on, and we still hadn't reached the trail. We made the decision to not stop that night, and we reached the trail just before full dark. We heard that terrifying shriek again, and we just galloped down the trail and absolutely hauled ass out of there. We reached a ranger station probably around 10 at night and slept there. We got back to my cousin's place around 3 o'clock the next day. I've gone up to visit him since then, but we mainly just stay on the property. I live on the outskirts of a tiny mountain town in Kentucky. The main part of the town is at the base of our tinier mountain. One road swerves up the mountain. The houses are spaced every couple of 100 yards. At the top is a reservoir or a man-made lake that's stocked with plenty of fish. The river flows down the mountain from the reservoir, through town, and into a larger natural lake. My house is the second highest on the mountain. The river flows right through my backyard. My best friend, his nickname is Leroy, so that's what I'll call him here, lives up the road in the highest house. And during the time of this, we were fishing in the woods between our houses in May of that year. It was somewhere around midnight to 1 a.m. I was perched on a rock midstream with 2 or 3 lines at a time. It was a deep river. Leroy was sitting over in the branches of some trees, trying to get some carp to come out of the roots to bite. At some point during this time, we were jolted out of what we were doing by this crazy mad howling from deeper in the woods. It scares us so bad that Leroy nearly falls out of the tree that he's in. The howling is followed by a growling and snarling. It couldn't be more than a couple 100 yards from us, downstream. Leroy and I flash our lights at each other and stare at each other, listening for maybe 5 minutes. After silence, Leroy says, "Damn, that was one hungry bobcat." I laugh to break the fear, but I'm still scared shitless though. I continue fishing, but I'm still listening to what's going on around me now. About an hour later, we're packing up. I'm stuffing some carp and bass into a cooler. Leroy is trying to get out of the tree. The base of the tree that Leroy is in is on the other side of the river. He'd have to get out of it and then wade through the river to get to the other side where our houses and the roads are. But I can't see him. I just hear a struggling in the brush. I hear that howl again, closer, and I scream, "Andrew!" I rip the Bowie knife out of my tackle box and dash across the river to get him. He's bugging out on the other side of the river. The howling is crazy loud. I finally get across. I light our oil lantern and toss it into the bushes. The glass breaks and fire erupts from it. I catch some bushes on fire, but I don't care. I'm trying to find my friend. And then I see him. Leroy is backed against a tree. His nose is bleeding, and there are scrapes on his arm. Whatever it was is gone. I stomp out the fire, help him to his feet, and we try to get out of there. As we're running, Leroy's just hollering, "That wasn't no damn bobcat," and he just keeps repeating that. My house is closer, so we run onto my porch. I wake up my girlfriend and tell her to call the sheriff. Leroy's shirt is ripped up, so we tell him to take it off. The scratches and stuff are all up his chest. On his chest is a big red mark that's similar to a human's hand. It's as if he had been slapped crazy hard. You can even make out the individual fingers. At the end of where each finger would be is a long gash, as if this thing had claws. We gather our wits, try to calm down, and rationalize it as some kind of punk kid playing a really awful prank. But I'm worried that it's a psycho. There's a penitentiary 1 county over. We grab some guns and lanterns. The sheriff is taking way too long to get here. We left our cooler and fishing gear out in the woods anyways. Uncle Chokey, my neighbor, his name is not Uncle Chokey. He's also not my uncle. That's just what literally everybody in town calls him. He heard us hollering. He comes out with his gun and his lantern too. We get back to the river to find our gear. Leroy's is on the other side of the river still. The coolers are knocked over. There's fish flopping around on the ground. And we know that we didn't kick our coolers over. Several of the fish are missing. We had caught 9 or 10, but there were only 3 or 4 left flopping around on the ground. They were too far away from the river. They would have killed themselves before they flopped back into the water. So we helped them along and tossed the fish back into the water ourselves. We don't care at this point. There's plenty of fish in there. We'll fish another day. We wade back across the river. Uncle Chokey is losing his wits behind us. He's old, about mid to late 70s. He's mumbling under his breath. It's really unsettling. We get to where Leroy was attacked and find his gear. We check the mud. We see, of course, mine and his boot prints. And then something else. Bare footprints that looked like a human's foot. Leroy and I stop and look at each other. Both of us are pale as hell. Uncle Chokey starts yelling into the woods. "Hey, you punks, get out here, for I feel ya. Ain't no time to be slumping round the woods." There's no howling. Nothing. We head downstream to where we first heard the howling. The mud turns to grass and brush. We lose the tracks. We find some bushes near where it happened. And we find something we didn't expect. A mutilated deer was lying on the ground. Its front legs were gone. Its chest was ripped open. There was tears all in its skin. Leroy and I heave and puke. This is the worst thing we've ever seen. Uncle Chokey hollers, "Damn, the thing is still alive." And sure enough, the poor doe is still blinking. The pupils are dilated more than anything I've ever seen, as if there weren't anything but pupil. The smell of innards is overwhelming. Leroy and I are still dry heaving at this point. Uncle Chokey puts it out of its misery with his 30-06. The rifle blast echoes through the whole mountain, and then we hear it again. The howling, but it's really far off. Uncle Chokey's hollering again. "Don't let me catch you, boys. This ain't right. Y'all can get jail time for this. It's cruel." While Chokey's hollering, I elbow Leroy and shine my lantern in front of us. While we're following these new set of footprints, the sheriff catches up with us, Sheriff Lorge. We end up following the new footprints into the woods. The prints are going the other way now, toward the bushes. Really, what we're doing is we're heading towards where this thing came from, not to where it headed. But then again, maybe it walked in a circle. We haven't heard the howling since Uncle Chokey shot. Sheriff Lorge thinks it might be a good idea to shoot again. Uncle Chokey ends up shooting at a birch branch that's a bit off from our footprint path. The thing howls from a couple yards behind us. All of us lose our shit. I throw my other lantern into the bushes like last time. A fire breaks out. All of us catch a glimpse of a pale, completely hairless man dashing through the woods away from us. All of us but Lorge fire in its direction. The howling gets farther and farther away. Lorge is freaking out. "Don't shoot. don't shoot. Leroy, Chokey, and I unload our rifles and shotguns. All four of us look at each other in our lantern light, scared shitless. Everyone reloads. We walk back out of the woods, pick up our stuff, and go home for the night. The next day, all three of the sheriffs, me, Leroy, Chokey, and some other folks head back into the woods. The deer's gone. We find the tree that Chokey shot at, and in the daylight, we notice that a tree where we had all stood and shot wildly at the thing was all scratched and cut up. What we're looking at is obviously not deer rubbings. These are deep slashes. We find these on nearly all of the trees behind the tree that Chokey had shot. The thing had been following us. We head through the brush and search in the direction that the thing had ran. We find some bullet holes in the trees where we shot after it. In the brush and grass, we find what looks like a pig run, which is grass and brush pushed away to the side, sort of like a path, and there's blood in it. We had either hit it, or this is the way it dragged the deer. We followed the pig run, single file, Leroy in front, followed by me, the deputy sheriff, which was some 19-year-old kid, Chokey, another deputy, and finally Sheriff Lorge. All of us have rifles loaded and ready. The pig run leads all the way to the edge of the woods. At the end is the edge of the mountain. It drops almost immediately at 90 degrees. There's endless valleys of trees. Nobody lives there. Nobody goes there. Nobody even owns this land. The only people who head back there are hunters who want a deep woods experience or moonshiners. It's too far down to see if the thing is down there. We decide that there's not a whole lot more we can do, and we're all freaked out. We kind of nope out of the woods after this. Sheriff calls the search off. The only way for the thing to get back up the mountain and into our woods is through the town. Leroy and I struck it off, still scared shitless. Chokey is in the bar in town, always telling stories to traveling hikers of the psycho in the woods and to never cross the river. Nobody crosses the river anymore at all, even people who live in the town. Leroy and I still fish in that same place, but sometimes you can still hear the howling really far off. We never hear it coming from our side of the river though. Leroy's scratches were treated at the hospital a few counties over as animal wounds. We aren't the only people in town that have sighted it, but the only people who've been attacked by it are us. Even some of the hikers come back to town talking about some creepy guy staring at them from the other side of the river. It's always when it's just coming on dark, and it's always the same description. A pale, naked person, with no real distinguishable features. I never saw its face, not in the daylight, but Leroy saw it up and close, and he said that he couldn't see any eyes. The only thing close to what we saw is I was digging around some local mythology, I guess is the best word, and we found some stories about the Pale Man. But those stories are really old. I'm never going out there looking for that thing again though. Leroy still has faint scars on his chest from where it gouged him. We still fish at the same spot like I said, but again, you don't cross the river, and we always bring our guns. Come to think of it, I haven't gone back really in the woods at all without something that can go boom. Every now and then, Chokey still pokes fun at us for getting sick over that deer. For real, that may have been the worst part. I've hunted, killed, and skinned and cleaned deer plenty of times before, but I've never seen one so mutilated in my life. And this thing didn't smell like any other dead deer. The smell was absolutely rotten. It may have been a coincidence because it had been out for several hours dying, but it still reeked. And Uncle Chokey is one funny old coot. We have hikers frequently that come off the Appalachian Trail into town to sleep and chill at the bar, and he tells every one of them, "Don't you cross that river, boy. There's a psycho that lives in that part of the woods. You get any trouble from him, you go knocking on one of the last 2 houses on that road. They know how to take care of him. But yeah, if somebody ever came to my door saying that the psycho was after him, I'd probably tell them to F off back to town and not lure it to my house. I sure hope that we never see it again. Leroy and I still have a tree stand over on that side of the woods, and we've never gone back for it, even in broad daylight. I'm still too scared to cross that river. Some guys from town, moonshiners, say that they head over there all the time to their shack, and they never seen anybody. They think that Choki is a loon. But they have admitted to seeing slashes in the trees and pig runs, though, and we don't have any hogs that high in the mountains. Maybe one day we'll get a group of 20 or so guys together, and maybe then I'll feel safe enough to go get my tree stand. So those encounters were pretty crazy, weren't they? If there was one in particular that stuck out to you, let me know which one it was down in the comments. Do you have an encounter of your own? I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you'd like to. Also down there is a PayPal and a Patreon if you would like to support the channel that way. And just a note on the Patreon thing, for some reason I still can't send messages or reply to messages, so if I didn't reply or if I didn't send a thank you message for becoming a patron, that's why. And if you're wondering what you get for being a patron, right now you basically get the video early. Sometimes the third video, the Leafcast or podcast, will go up on Patreon the same day as it does for everyone else. That just depends on what's going on that week and when I had time to actually sit down and record it. But with all that in mind, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then please like and share and subscribe and all that good stuff. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump with me, and thank you for watching. Have a good week.